from News Channel 8, this is News Talk with Bruce DePoint.
We welcome you into a special Thanksgiving week show. Hi, everybody. Great to have you here today. We've got a great lineup, so we're delighted that you are with us. Our first guest this time is the district's first elected Attorney General, Carl Racine, in his first term in that post. Welcome back. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Bruce. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving to you. A lot of firsts there.
Indeed.
Good to have you here. Before we get to the topics that we referenced in the open, I want to talk with you about the situation that's occurring globally.
Sure.
And the obvious fear and concern people have, and the sense of mourning. I mean, to have witnessed in just the past few days so many people out on the town in a major cosmopolitan world capital, Paris, a city with remarkable similarities to the nation's capital. As we come on the air today, Brussels is on heightened alert. Life is sort of frozen in place, and people are being asked not to go about their regular routine, but to stay home, not use transit, not gather in public. This is one of those moments of great tension, and as I said a second ago, sorrow.
There really is a lot of sorrow, and to the folks who were impacted in Paris and certainly in Mali over the weekend, our hearts go out to them. I think it's really important for citizens to listen carefully to what law enforcement and their elected officials are telling them. The situation in the District of Columbia is very different than that in Brussels. Our law enforcement and our mayor have made clear that they are on a heightened alert, but that we should continue to engage in our normal activities. We do have to be aware of our surroundings, but by no means do we need to yield to the fear that terrorists are trying to impose upon us.
Some of the folks in Europe, some of Europe's leaders are looking back at some of the opportunities that might have been missed, and critics are saying that more could have been done to go after neighborhoods or people where there was for some suspicion before, but not enough action.
Sure.
And there was then subsequently a huge coordinated attack and widespread loss of life. Are we entering, in your view, a period of a reinvigorated discussion about the balances between what we're willing to give up in terms of privacy, but the things that we need in terms of safety?
Well, I think that naturally these kinds of awful, violent occurrences cause us to reevaluate the balance that we have, balance in regards to our freedoms and liberties, and balancing that against, of course, more aggressive law enforcement activities. Those conversations are appropriate, and it's important for us to understand what the citizens want. Nonetheless, in the United States of America, of course, the idea of law enforcement being constrained by the Constitution remains a very important value.
But we've seen things in terms of what law enforcement is able to do, what the technology permits, and what public support probably would undergird.
Sure.
In terms of eavesdropping, in terms of disrupting people who haven't done anything wrong yet but might be plotting something. I mean, these things individually don't always look good or feel good, but when something happens, there's, as happened in Paris, and certainly the fear in Belgium right now, I think there's a sense that we better be proactive, or we're going to have great regret, because you can't bring people back once they've been killed.
Well, that's exactly right. And for citizens of the District of Columbia and residents of the city, you should know that from the mayor and certainly MPD and working with our federal partners, we're absolutely focused on making sure that we're operating together, sharing information and acting on actionable information. And with respect to further law enforcement tools, that's the kind of discussion that the City Council, as well as Congress, has to have, and the American people need to weigh in.
What goes through your mind when you hear governors talking about keeping Syrian refugees out of their states?
Well, quite honestly, as an immigrant myself from Haiti, and knowing so many immigrants from throughout the world, I know that our country is one that is only better when it welcomes people from other countries. And so I worry about the reflexive response of shutting down the doors. I also worry about...
Is it legal?
I don't believe that any of the governors have asserted any legal basis for excluding people from their states.
Are they doing this as to send Washington a message, or to communicate with the people of their states that they have a leader who shares their fears? I mean, if they don't have, if you're right, and the legal basis to say that somebody's who's been admitted by federal immigration, the federal immigration system into the country, that they can't then pass from Illinois to Wisconsin or what have you, if they even share a border.
Sure.
You know, if that doesn't stand legal scrutiny, then what do you think is at play there?
Well, I think what's going on really is that governors and other elected officials want the federal government to know that they're concerned about the process of allowing outsiders into the United States. And I do believe it's incumbent upon the federal government to really spell out exactly what rigorous vetting, background checks are involved. And I think that once the government does that, people will have much more confidence that we are scrutinizing folks who come into the country. And overwhelmingly, there is no doubt about this, immigrants from whatever country who come into the United States are extremely productive.
Let's talk about our main topics this time. Can you talk about efforts your office has made in the area of synthetic drugs to make sure that police on the front lines and prosecutors have the tools they need to get this scourge off the street to the maximum extent possible?
Absolutely. Let me identify part of the problem first. So synthetic cannabinoids are chemical compounds that cause all manner of erratic and oftentimes violent behavior. The manufacturers of these compounds literally change the particular compound on a regular basis so as to avoid testing and so as to avoid legal liability, because by changing a compound, that compound may not be on Schedule 1 of the Federal Register. What we have done in the District of Columbia is we've proposed legislation that will allow us to prosecute on the basis of a compound being within a class of compounds. So the very compound itself at issue need not be on Schedule 1 so long as it is part of a class of compounds that is on that schedule.
Otherwise, it's a never-ending cat-and-mouse game, right? You're always chasing the formula du jour.
That's exactly right. And candidly, you know, the bad guys are oftentimes one step ahead of the sheriff. So here now we're going to have the appropriate legislative tools to allow for better testing and more prosecution.
Is this something that goes before D.C. Council?
Yes. So we have prepared the legislation and we're submitting it to the Judiciary Committee where Kenyon McDuffie's team will evaluate it, and eventually the Council will have an opportunity to vote on it.
Many cities are dealing with this problem right now. Your legislation, I guess in some ways, taps into this common challenge that American cities and probably suburbs as well are facing?
That's exactly right. Through the National Association of Attorney General, of which I'm a member, we've worked together with our colleagues from other states to tackle a range of drugs impacting the local communities. Synthetics, for sure, in the District of Columbia, heroin in other jurisdictions. And so what we've done is we've come up with the best practice to try to elevate our enforcement tools, and the legislation that we have before the Council is a direct result of our working with our state partners from other jurisdictions.
The nation's attorneys general are also focusing right now on the huge VW scandal. This is something that I guess primarily affects people who bought a car that perhaps passed emissions scrutiny under very false set of circumstances. This is one of the biggest scandals to ever hit the automotive world. What is your office doing, and what should consumers know?
Sure. It's really important, as you just highlighted, what consumers bought when they bought their cars. The reason why these consumers bought the cars at issue is because they were told that the cars were good for the environment and they would have excellent performance. Well, it turns out that through the use of the fraudulent testing masking mechanism, the environment was damaged, and when that's fixed, performance will be impacted. So in short, consumers did not get what they bargained for. Through a multi-state Attorney General investigation, of which the Office of the Attorney General of the District of Columbia is on the executive committee, we're seeking to redress those wrongs.
Is it possible that everyone who bought an affected car will get some financial consideration even if they don't join a class action lawsuit, or how do you expect, how did things like this typically unfold?
Sure. The way these things typically unfold is that a group of Attorney General will band together, bring an action against the alleged wrongdoer, here Volkswagen. We will focus on the consumer and redressing the consumer, and will frankly finally reach probably a settlement that will create a pool of money to go back to consumers to get them at least closer to what they bargained for.
In hindsight, this was the sort of thing that was always going to come out, and it was always going to be, the optics of it were always going to be quite devastating. Are you surprised anyone with half a brain thought that they could sort of go the distance without this coming out?
Well, it's, I try not to put myself in the minds of a wrongdoer per se, but I think that oftentimes what happens is people think that they're smarter than their consumers and that they're smarter than law enforcement. And so you're right. This was bound to be found out. Now that it has, it's time to hold the company accountable and to get to the consumers that which they bargained for. We
have to hit a break in a couple seconds. People have talked about fines and sanctions against the company being so big that they could topple VW. Is that a possible outcome, and does that factor all into the legal aspect of this whole situation?
Sure. I think in this circumstance, it's very different than, say, the financial scandal of 2007, where many banks were salvaged because they were too big to fail. What we're talking about here is a single car manufacturer. To the extent that Volkswagen has troubles, I think the other car manufacturers will step up.
Talking with D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine. A quick break here. Back, though, with more News Talk right after this.